God's favor is about to overtake you, not someday far away, not in a vague spiritual future, not after everything is perfect, but right where you are, in the middle of your questions, your struggles, your hopes, and even your doubts. This is not just a comforting phrase or a poetic religious idea. It is a living truth rooted in the very nature of who God is. Favor is not something you chase. It is something that pursues you. It is not earned by perfection. It is released by grace. And when God's favor overtakes a person, it changes not only circumstances, but identity, direction, and destiny. To be overtaken means something is moving faster than you are. It means you may be walking, limping, or even crawling. But God's favor is running. You may feel like life has delayed you, resisted you, or even pushed you backward. But favor does not wait for you to catch up. It catches you. Many people think they must arrive at a certain spiritual level before God can bless them. But the truth is that God's favor often shows up when you feel least prepared. That is because favor is not a reward for the strong. It is a covering for the weak. It is God stepping into your human limitations and saying, let me do what you not do on your own. God's favor has always worked this way. Throughout history, favor did not rest on the most qualified, the most powerful, or the most obvious choice. It rested on shepherds, prisoners, widows, outsiders, and forgotten people. Favor found Joseph in a pit before it placed him in a palace. Favor found David in a field before it placed him on a throne. Favor found Esther as an orphan before it made her a queen. Favor found Ruth as a foreigner before it positioned her in a lineage of kings. This tells us something profound. Your current situation is not a contradiction to God's favor. It may be the very setting where it is about to be revealed. Many people misunderstand favor as an easy life. They assume that if God favors someone, that person will. Never struggle, never suffer, never experience loss or opposition. But favor does not mean the absence of adversity. Often it means the presence of purpose in the middle of adversity. Favor does not remove the battle. It guarantees the outcome. It does not always stop the storm, but it ensures that the storm will not stop you. When God's favor is on your life, what was meant to destroy you becomes the very thing that develops you. There are moments when favor is quiet. It does not announce itself with dramatic signs or immediate breakthroughs. Sometimes favor looks like protection. You never noticed. Doors that closed before they could harm you. Delays that saved your life or strength that kept you standing when you should have collapsed. You may not realize how many times God's favor has already overtaken you simply because it did not arrive in the form you expected. Favor does not always give you what you want. It gives you what you need for where you are going. God's favor also has a timing that is perfect, even when it feels painfully slow. We live in a world that values speed, instant results, and immediate gratification. But God works with precision, not panic. When favor overtakes you, it does so at the exact moment your character, your faith, and your calling can carry it. Too much too soon can crush a person. So sometimes God allows seasons of waiting, stretching, and refining, not as punishment, but as preparation. What feels like delay is often divine development. It is important to understand that favor does not mean everyone will like you. In fact, favor can sometimes attract misunderstanding, jealousy, and resistance. Joseph was favored by God, yet betrayed by his brothers. David was favored by God, yet pursued by Saul. Jesus himself was the ultimate expression of God's favor, yet rejected by many. Favor does not make you invisible to opposition. It makes you unstoppable in spite of it. When God favors you, even resistance becomes a tool that pushes you closer to purpose. There are people who have counted themselves out because of their past. They believe that mistakes, failures, or sins have disqualified them from God's favor. But favor is not based on your past. It is anchored in God's mercy. God is not shocked by your story. He is not surprised by your scars. He does not withdraw his hand because you fell. If anything, his favor moves closer when you are broken, because that is where grace does its deepest work. The same God who forgives also restores, and the same God who restores also promotes. God's favor has the power to change systems, not just situations. When favor overtakes you, it can give you access where you were once excluded. It can cause people to see value in you that they previously ignored. It can turn a no into a yes without explanation. It can accelerate processes that should have taken years. Favor can compress time what others struggle for endlessly. God can release to you suddenly not because you are better, but because His purpose requires it. Favor is not meant to end with you. One of the greatest misunderstandings is thinking that God's favor is solely for personal comfort or status. Favor flows through you so it can touch others. When God blesses you, it is often because He wants to make you a blessing. Favor gives you influence, and influence carries responsibility. God does not elevate people just to display them. He elevates them to serve, to heal, to restore, and to represent His heart in the world. There are seasons when favor feels hidden because God is working behind the scenes. You may feel overlooked, underappreciated, or unseen. But favor does not need an audience to be effective. God can be arranging conversations you are not part of yet, preparing opportunities you cannot see yet, and softening hearts you have not met yet. Just because you do not see movement does not mean nothing is happening. Favor works in silence before it speaks in power. Faith plays a crucial role in recognizing and receiving favor. Faith does not create favor, but it positions you to walk in it. When you believe that God is for you, you begin to move differently. You pray with expectation. You work with excellence. You endure hardship with hope. You stop seeing obstacles as final and start seeing them as temporary. Faith opens your eyes to see that what looks like the end may actually be the doorway to something new. God's favor also has a way of surprising us. It often arrives through ordinary moments and unexpected people. A conversation, a connection, an idea, a small decision can become the doorway through which favor overtakes your life. That is why obedience in small things matters. You never know which act of faith will align you with a divine opportunity. Favor does not always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes disguised as responsibility. There will be times when you are tempted to compare your journey with others. You may look at someone else's success and wonder why their favor seems louder or faster. But favor is personal. God's plan for you is not a copy of someone else's story. Comparison will blind you to the unique way God is working in your life. Just because someone else's season looks different does not mean yours is lacking. Favor unfolds according to purpose, not popularity. When God's favor overtakes you, it brings clarity. Things that once confused you begin to make sense. You start to understand why certain doors closed, why certain relationships ended, why certain prayers were delayed. Favor gives you perspective. It allows you to look back and see God's fingerprints on moments you once questioned. What felt like loss reveals itself as alignment. What felt like rejection reveals itself as protection. It is also important to remain humble when favor manifests. Favor is a gift, not a trophy. Pride can disconnect you from the very grace that lifted you. Humility keeps you grounded and grateful. It reminds you that everything you have is because of God's goodness, not just your effort. Gratitude protects favor. When you honor God in your success, you make room for continued growth. There are people listening who feel weary. You have been faithful, consistent, and patient, yet you feel like nothing has changed. Hear this clearly. God has not forgotten you. Favor does not expire. Just because you are tired does not mean God is late. Sometimes favor arrives at the moment when you are about to give up, not to shame you, but to show you that endurance was not in vain. Strength may feel gone, but hope is still alive. God's favor has a way of rewriting narratives. What was spoken over you by others does not have the final word. Labels placed on you by society, family, or even your own mind are not stronger than God's promise. Favor redefines identity. It calls you chosen when you felt rejected, capable when you felt inadequate, worthy when you felt disqualified. When God speaks favor over your life, it silences every other voice. You do not need to strive anxiously for favor. Rest in God's presence. Seek His heart, not just His hand. Favor flows naturally from relationship. When you walk with God, align your values with His and trust Him with your life. Favor becomes a byproduct, not a burden. You were never meant to chase blessings. You were meant to walk with the one who blesses. As you move forward, remain open. Favor often requires courage to step into unfamiliar territory. When God opens a door, it may lead you into something new, something uncomfortable, something that stretches you. Do not let fear make you shrink back from what favor is offering. The same God who opens the door will give you the grace to walk through it. God's favor is about to overtake you, not because you have everything figured out, but because God is faithful to His word. It is about to meet you in your ordinary days and turn them into holy moments. It is about to lift burdens you thought you would carry forever. It is about to bring restoration where there has been loss, joy where there has been sorrow, and purpose where there has been confusion. Stay expectant. Stay faithful. Stay open. Favor is not behind you. It is catching up to you. And when it does, you will look back and realize that every step, every tear, every prayer, and every season was leading to this moment. God's favor is not just coming toward you. It is about to overtake you. Favor is God's initiative, not human effort. This truth challenges the natural way we think about success, reward, and blessing. In a world that constantly measures worth by performance, achievement, and qualification, it is easy to assume that God operates by the same system. Many people believe that if they pray harder, work harder, or live perfectly enough, then God will finally decide to bless them. But God's favor does not flow from human striving. It flows from His grace. It begins with who He is, not with what we do. From the beginning, Scripture reveals a God who moves first. Before humanity ever reached for Him, He reached toward humanity. Favor has always been an expression of God's love and purpose, not a response to human excellence. If favor were based on perfection, no one would qualify. If it were based on performance, it would constantly shift depending on our best or worst days. But because favor is rooted in God's character, it remains steady even when we are inconsistent. This is what makes God's favor so powerful and so humbling at the same time. Many of the people God favored in history were not the most impressive by human standards. They were often flawed, insecure, and overlooked. Yet God chose them anyway. This shows us that favor is not about being the most talented or the most spiritual. It is about being chosen by God for His purposes. When God decides to place His favor on someone, He does not consult their resume. He looks at His plan. Favor is God saying, I will do this through you even when you feel unqualified to carry it. Human effort has its place, but it is not the source of favor. We obey God, serve faithfully, and live with integrity, not to earn favor, but because we already stand in grace. When effort becomes an attempt to prove our worth, it leads to exhaustion, guilt, and fear of failure. But when we understand that favor is given, not earned, our effort becomes an expression of gratitude rather than a desperate attempt to be accepted. We serve from rest, not from pressure. One of the greatest burdens people carry is the belief that they must be good enough before God can move in their lives. This mindset causes people to delay hope and postpone expectation. They think once I fix myself, then God will bless me. But God's favor often shows up in the middle of weakness, not after it is resolved. Grace meets us where we are, not where we pretend to be. God does not wait for perfection before He acts. He works through imperfection to reveal His glory. When favor overtakes you, it is evidence that God has decided to intervene. It is God stepping into your story and doing what you could not do on your own. It is His hand opening doors you could not force open, protecting you in ways you did not see and positioning you beyond your natural ability. Favor reminds us that life is not controlled solely by human effort, connections, or strength. There is a divine hand at work guiding outcomes according to God's purpose. This understanding also removes pride. If favor were earned, we could take credit for it. We could look at others and assume we are more deserving. But because favor is initiated by God, there is no room for boasting. Everything becomes an act of gratitude. We recognize that what we have is not because we were better, but because God was gracious. This creates humility, compassion, and a deeper dependence on God rather than on self. At the same time, knowing that favor is God's initiative brings deep peace. You no longer live in fear of losing God's blessing because of one mistake. You stop obsessing over measuring up and start trusting in God's faithfulness. This does not make us careless. It makes us confident. We pursue righteousness not out of fear, but out of love. We get back up when we fall, knowing that God's favor is not fragile or easily withdrawn. God's favor flowing from grace also means that timing is in His hands. You may feel ready before favor manifests, or you may feel completely unprepared when it does. Either way, God's decision is final. When He chooses to act, no lack in you can stop Him. He equips those He calls, not the other way around. Favor does not wait for your confidence. It produces it. Understanding that favor is God's initiative changes how you see your life. You stop striving for approval and start walking in assurance. You stop trying to earn what has already been given. You rest in the truth that God is working on your behalf, not because you qualified yourself, but because He chose to love you and include you in His divine plan. That is the power of favor rooted in grace. And that is why when it overtakes you, it leaves no doubt that it was God who did it. Your current season does not cancel God's favor. This is a truth many people struggle to accept because hardship often feels like evidence that something has gone wrong. When life becomes difficult, confusing, or delayed, it is easy to assume that God has withdrawn, that favor has been lost, or that we have somehow missed our moment. But the presence of struggle is not the absence of God. In many cases, it is the environment where His favor is quietly being formed and prepared to appear. Seasons of difficulty have a way of distorting our perspective. When prayers seem unanswered and progress feels slow, discouragement can convince us that nothing good is happening. Yet God's work is not always visible. Just as seeds grow underground long before they break the surface, favor often develops in hidden places. What feels like stagnation may actually be preparation. What feels like delay may be divine timing at work. God is never inactive. Even when life feels still throughout life, people tend to associate favor with ease, clarity, and momentum. We assume that if God is pleased, things will flow smoothly. But many of the most favored individuals experienced seasons that were anything but easy. They faced uncertainty, rejection, waiting, and pressure long before their breakthrough came. These seasons did not cancel favor. They shaped it. They built endurance, wisdom, and dependence on God that would be necessary for what came next. Confusing seasons can be especially challenging because they leave us without direction. When you do not know what the next step is, it can feel like you are failing or falling behind. But confusion does not mean God is absent. Sometimes God allows uncertainty so that trust can grow deeper. When you cannot rely on your own understanding, you learn to rely on God's guidance. Favor is not always about knowing where you are going. Sometimes it is about knowing who is leading you. Delayed seasons test patience and faith. Waiting can feel like punishment, especially when you see others moving ahead. But delay does not mean denial. God's favor operates on a timetable that aligns with purpose, not pressure. What God has prepared for you must meet you at the right time, not just the time you desire. If favor arrived too early, it could overwhelm you. If it arrived too late, it would miss its purpose. God's timing protects both the blessing and the person receiving it. Struggle also has a refining effect. It exposes what is fragile and strengthens what is essential. In difficult seasons, character is formed. Priorities are clarified and dependence on God is deepened. Favor is not just about changing your circumstances. It is about preparing you to steward what God will place in your hands. Many people ask God for elevation, but elevation without preparation can lead to collapse. God's favor often works quietly to ensure that when the moment comes, you are ready to stand. It is important to remember that favor is not proven by comfort. Sometimes favor looks like endurance instead of escape. It looks like peace in the middle of chaos. It looks like strength to keep going when quitting would be easier. These quiet expressions of grace are just as powerful as visible breakthroughs. God may be sustaining you now so He can promote you later. Feeling overlooked or forgotten is another common experience in difficult seasons. When effort goes unnoticed and faithfulness seems unrewarded, doubt can creep in. But God sees what others miss. Favor does not depend on human recognition. God can elevate you without applause and reward you without announcement. When the time is right, what was hidden will be revealed, and what was unseen will be acknowledged. Your current season is not a verdict on your future. It is a chapter, not the conclusion. God's favor is not erased by hardship, slowed by confusion, or canceled by delay. In fact, these seasons often serve as the foundation for what is coming next. What you are walking through now may be the very thing that positions you for greater impact, deeper faith, and lasting growth. So do not interpret difficulty as rejection. Do not assume waiting means abandonment. Stay faithful where you are. Trust that God is working even when you cannot trace His hand. Favor does not always announce itself immediately, but it never fails to arrive on time. Your current season is not working against God's favor. It may be working for it. God's favor can turn opposition into opportunity. This truth reshapes the way we view resistance, adversity, and conflict in our lives. Most people assume that if God's favor is present, opposition should disappear. We expect smooth paths, easy victories, and uninterrupted progress. Yet the reality of God's work often looks very different. Favor does not eliminate challenges. It transforms them. It takes what was designed to hinder you and uses it as a platform to move you forward. Opposition often arrives at moments when progress is near. Resistance is not always a sign that you are on the wrong path. Sometimes it is confirmation that you are on the right one. When God's favor is at work, obstacles lose their power to define the outcome. They may still create pressure, discomfort, and uncertainty, but they no longer have the final say. Favor ensures that the struggle will serve a purpose rather than result in defeat. Many people become discouraged when they encounter delay or resistance because they interpret it as failure. They begin to question themselves, their calling, or even God's involvement. But opposition does not mean God has stepped away. Often it means He is actively shaping a greater result. Favor does not prevent you from being challenged. It prevents the challenge from destroying you. It changes the role of adversity from an enemy into a tool. What was meant to stop you can become the very thing that strengthens you. Pressure builds endurance. Conflict develops wisdom. Delay deepens patience. Rejection clarifies identity. These experiences, though painful, refine qualities that success alone cannot produce. God's favor works through these moments to prepare you for elevation. Without resistance, there would be no need for growth. Without struggle, there would be no testimony of God's power at work in your life. Opposition also has a way of positioning you for visibility. Many breakthroughs are born in moments of challenge. When God turns difficulty into opportunity, it often brings clarity, recognition, or access that would not have existed otherwise. What seemed like a setback becomes a setup. What looked like a closed door becomes a redirection towards something greater. Favor has the ability to reroute your path without removing your purpose. It is important to understand that favor does not mean you will always feel strong. There will be moments when opposition makes you feel overwhelmed, tired, or uncertain. But favor operates beyond feelings. It sustains you when strength runs low and gives you resolve when answers are unclear. God's favor does not always change the situation immediately, but it changes how the situation affects you. People may intend harm, delay, or limitation, but God can override their intentions. Human opposition cannot cancel divine purpose. When favor is present, even negative actions are woven into a greater plan. What others use to push you down, God can use to lift you up. What was designed to expose your weakness can reveal God's strength through you. Favor ensures that no experience is wasted. Opposition can also sharpen discernment. It teaches you what matters, who to trust, and where your true dependence lies. In seasons of challenge, you learn to rely less on external approval and more on God's direction. This internal clarity is often what prepares you for greater responsibility. Favor does not just elevate your position, it matures your perspective. When you understand that God's favor can turn opposition into opportunity, your response to difficulty begins to change. You no longer panic at resistance or lose hope in delay. Instead, you remain expectant, knowing that God is able to work through what stands against you. Faith allows you to endure the process without becoming bitter or defeated. Opposition does not have the authority to determine your outcome. God's favor does. What was meant to break you can become the moment that defines your growth. What was meant to delay, you can refine your timing. What was meant to stop, you can launch you into a new season. When God's favor is at work, no challenge is wasted and no opposition is final. Favor opens doors no human can shut. This is one of the most powerful expressions of what happens when God decides to move on someone's behalf. Human systems are often built on rules, qualifications, approvals, and limitations. They decide who is accepted, who is rejected, who advances, and who is overlooked. Many people spend years trying to gain access through the right connections, credentials, or influence. But when God's favor overtakes you, access is granted in ways that cannot be explained by human logic or controlled by human authority. There are doors in life that effort alone cannot open. These doors are guarded by systems, decisions, and people who seem unmovable. Rejection at these doors can be deeply discouraging, especially when you know you have the ability, the heart, or the calling to step into what lies beyond them. Yet God's favor is not restricted by human gatekeepers. When He decides to open a door, no person, policy, or past failure has the power to keep it closed. Favor has the ability to shift systems. Structures that once worked against you can suddenly begin to work for you. Rules are reconsidered, exceptions are made, and obstacles lose their authority. This does not happen because you argued harder or pushed longer, but because God touched the situation. What was once rigid becomes flexible. What was once impossible becomes accessible. Favor rearranges circumstances quietly but decisively. Hearts also change under the influence of favor. People who once ignored you may suddenly support you. Those who resisted you may begin to advocate for you. This does not always come with explanations, and it does not need them. God has the power to move people in ways that align with His purpose. Favor can create agreement where there was opposition and understanding where there was doubt. It reminds us that influence does not belong solely to humans. God directs outcomes according to His will. Opportunities that come through favor often feel sudden, but they are rarely accidental. They are the result of God's timing aligning with preparation. You may have been faithful in obscurity, consistent without recognition, and patient through closed doors. When favor opens the right door, it can feel like everything changes at once. What others strive for over years, God can release in a moment. Favor has the power to accelerate progress without compromising purpose. It is important to recognize that doors opened by favor cannot be shut by criticism, jealousy, or opposition. When God opens a door, He also provides the authority to stand in it. People may question how you got there or whether you deserve it, but their opinions do not determine your position. Favor settles the matter. It establishes you where God intends you to be and sustains you there. At the same time, favor invites responsibility. An open door is not just an opportunity. It is an assignment. God opens doors so that His purpose can be fulfilled through you. Walking through a door opened by favor requires humility, wisdom, and obedience. The same grace that opens the door must be relied upon to walk through it well. There will be moments when doors remain closed despite your effort and desire. These moments can be frustrating, but they are also protective. A closed door is not always a denial. Sometimes it is God preserving you for the right opportunity. Favor does not force every door open. It opens the correct ones at the correct time. Trusting God with closed doors is just as important as celebrating open ones. When you look back over your life, you may begin to recognize moments when favor quietly opened doors you could not have opened yourself. A conversation that led to opportunity, a decision that redirected your path, a chance that changed your future. These moments are reminders that God is actively involved in your journey. Favor opens doors no human can shut, not to elevate pride, but to advance purpose. It is God's way of saying that His plan is greater than human limitation. When God's favor overtakes you, access is granted, paths are cleared, and opportunities appear. Not because of human logic, but because of divine intention at work. In your life, favor requires humility and obedience to sustain it. While favor is given freely by God's grace, how we respond to it determines whether it continues to grow and bear fruit in our lives. God's favor is not fragile, but our posture toward it matters. Humility, gratitude, and obedience keep us aligned with God's will and allow favor to remain active, effective, and purposeful. Humility is the foundation that supports favor. When God blesses a person, there is always the temptation to believe the outcome is a result of personal ability, intelligence, or effort. Pride suddenly shifts dependence away from God and places it on self. But humility keeps the heart aware of its source. It acknowledges that every open door, every opportunity, and every breakthrough exists because of God's grace. A humble heart remains teachable, correctable, and receptive to God's direction even in seasons of success. God resists pride, not because he wants to limit people, but because pride disconnects people from him. Favor flows best where there is dependence on God rather than self-sufficiency. When humility is present, God can continue to trust a person with greater responsibility. Humility says, I need God just as much now as I did before the blessing arrived. That posture protects favor from becoming a burden instead of a blessing. Gratitude is closely connected to humility. A grateful heart recognizes God's hand in every good thing and responds with thankfulness rather than entitlement. Gratitude keeps the heart soft and prevents favor from being taken for granted. When gratitude is absent, people begin to expect what was once received as a gift. This sense of entitlement dulls spiritual awareness and leads to careless decisions. Gratitude, on the other hand, sharpens awareness of God's presence and deepens relationship with him. Obedience is the outward expression of humility and gratitude. It demonstrates trust in God's wisdom and authority. Obedience does not mean perfection, but it does mean alignment. When God gives instruction, direction, or correction, obedience keeps favor flowing in the right direction. Ignoring God's guidance can lead to misuse of what he has given. Obedience ensures that favor is not only experienced, but stewarded well. Many people desire God's favor, but resist his instruction. They want the blessing without the boundaries. However, God's commands are not restrictions meant to limit joy. They are safeguards designed to protect purpose. Obedience keeps favor from drifting into self-destruction. It keeps a person grounded when opportunities increase and pressure intensifies. Favor may open doors, but obedience determines how you walk through them. Staying aligned with God's will also require sensitivity to his voice. As favor increases, distractions often increase as well. Opportunities multiply, expectations grow, and demands become heavier. Without intentional alignment, it is easy to move ahead of God rather than with him. Humility keeps you listening. Obedience keeps you responsive. Together they ensure that favor does not lead you away from God, but draws you closer to him. There are times when obedience will be uncomfortable or misunderstood. God may ask you to make decisions that do not make sense to others or that appear to slow progress, but obedience honors God above outcomes. It trusts that God sees what you cannot see. Favor is not just about speed or success. It is about direction. Obedience ensures that progress does not come at the cost of integrity or peace. When humility, gratitude, and obedience work together, favor becomes fruitful rather than fleeting. It produces lasting impact, not temporary elevation. It shapes character as much as it shapes circumstances. God's favor is meant to grow with you, not outpace you. A humble and obedient heart creates space for God to continue working without resistance. Favor is sustained by relationship, not performance. Humility keeps that relationship healthy. Gratitude keeps it alive. Obedience keeps it aligned. When you walk in these qualities, favor does not just touch your life for a moment. It remains, grows, and fulfills God's purpose through you. God's favor is meant to bless others through you. While favor certainly brings personal benefit, comfort, and opportunity, it is never designed to stop with one individual. God's blessings are intentional and purposeful. When he releases favor on a life, it is because he desires that favor to flow outward, touching families, communities, and even generations. Favor is not an end point. It is a conduit. One of the greatest misunderstandings about favor is viewing it as proof of personal importance rather than divine purpose. When people believe favor exists solely for their own gain, it can lead to selfishness, isolation, or pride. But God's heart has always been outward facing. He blesses so that others may be blessed. Favor is God entrusting you with influence, resources, or access so that his goodness can be revealed through you to those around you. Favor often places you in positions where your decisions affect others. It may give you a voice, a platform, or authority that extends beyond your own life. In these moments, favor becomes a responsibility. God expects what He gives to be used with wisdom, compassion, and integrity. The measure of favor is not how much you accumulate, but how much good flows through you because of what God has placed in your hands. When God's favor works through you, it brings impact. Your words can encourage, your actions can restore, and your presence can bring hope. Favor can give you access to spaces where brokenness exists, allowing you to represent God's love in practical ways. Sometimes the greatest expression of favor is not what you receive, but what you are able to give. God often positions favored people as answers to other people's prayers. Favor also creates opportunities to serve rather than be served. True blessing does not separate you from others. It connects you to them more deeply. God's favor equips you to lift others. Advocate for the overlooked and extend grace where it is needed most. When you remain mindful that favor flows through you, humility is preserved and purpose remains clear. There will be moments when using favor to bless others requires sacrifice. It may cost time, comfort, or convenience. But God never wastes generosity. What you release in obedience returns in ways that sustain both you and those you serve. Favor multiplies when it is shared. The more freely it flows, the more powerfully it works. God's favor through your life can also bring transformation. It can change atmospheres, challenge injustice, and inspire faith. People may not always recognize the source, but the fruit will be evident. When favor is handled well, it points others toward God rather than toward the individual carrying it. This is how favorable fulfills its highest purpose. It is important to guard your heart as favor increases. When blessings grow, so does the temptation to focus inward, but staying mindful of others keeps favor healthy. It reminds you that what you have is not just for your enjoyment, but for God's assignment. Favor that is hoarded eventually loses its effectiveness, but favor that is shared remains alive and impactful. God's favor is an expression of His love moving through human lives. He chooses people to reflect His goodness in visible, tangible ways. When you allow favor to bless others through you, your life becomes a testimony of God's grace in action. Favor then becomes more than a personal experience. It becomes a powerful instrument of blessing, impact, and transformation in the world around.